Good morning. We are reviewing and summarizing conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis on volume 3, page 1462. Middle of 1462. And as I said in the previous class, we're winding down now a pretty long section of over 110 pages, to be exact, 10 pages, from Aleph Shin Nun or Shin Nun Beis, and we're now on Aleph Tov Samach Beis, 1462. And the Rebbe Rashab, last major point in the whole process of the neshama coming down below and maintaining, and not just maintaining through avodah, obviously, its divine connection, but actually strengthening it due to the intensified thirst and yearning created by the distance and the darkness, the shcheirani. So that creates a tzoma nafshi lalikim, mosei avay ve'era. And through this thirst, he actually draws down this type of riyah, like he said, ki'ilu roya mamish. So even though when you're in the presence of someone you love, it seems like you see them directly, yet the distance of not seeing them actually creates a deeper appreciation, and I'd go even further, a deeper perception of them, because the thirst leads you straight to their core essence. In this context, we're talking obviously about God. So what did we learn yesterday? That Mashenken Ada Asad Lave, we learned in the previous paragraph on the bottom of 1461, there'll be the revelation of Atzmus Ein Sof, Ru Ato Kiani Anihu, L'Asid Chaim Atzmim, like he said, higher than Sevav Kalalman and Mamala Kalalman. Mashenken Achshav, that's the new paragraph at the bottom of 1461, Hu B'chinas Atzemoyin. The main focus today is on the thirst to come to that level. But what we're thirsting for is to reach that level of Riyah Chushis through the Tzemoyin. And with that, he went on to explain and said to look in the Siddur and L'Kutei Torah on the Maimar Hoya Mida Chedesh B'Chadoshe B'In Shemesh B'Shabbos Dokel Aniyim. And the Rebbe Rashab went on to explain what that means. That the weekdays, you have an element of chelas ava that needs to be healed, an element of love sickness created by the distance. And how do you get to that point? Through his bonus, and he spoke about his bonus, two main points. His bonus, eich shayeshu hepech ha'ayin, that the yesh is opposite of the ayin. At the same time, the yesh you have to say it was created by an ayin, though it's not obvious to the yesh, but that's what creates the thirst and the desire and yearning to have the gili ha'ayin by yesh. It's like discovering that I have a parent that I cannot see. So what happens? There's a deep yearning to connect to that parent. Here, obviously, it's not a parent. We're talking about the ayin, a mahava that creates the yesh. And then also the hisbonus of the koyach Ein Sof, the power of Ein Sof in the creation, and the power to create the consistency, maintaining existence on Hoget Midis, as it's called. So all this leads to Hasaga Gemura. It's not just based on faith. This is a matter of understanding to the point, Ki'ilu Reya Mamish. And he recites a mimer from volume 2, Laman Das, Lufia Mavur Khan. It's from the profound thirst, the Tzoma Nafshi, that creates this connection, recognizing Chayecha Amiti, the true life, true source of life, the true reality of life is Atzmus. And that's what the Tzemoyin does, and that's the Tzemoyin from the contemplation, and it begins with the weekdays when you feel the Chelas Ava, this love sickness, and that leads to Shemesh B'Shabbos, to that on Shabbos we have the Shemesh Havaya, the Gila of Shem Havaya, which is a Tzedakah La'aniyim. And clearly he's touching your aniyim like impoverished, as in someone that is lacking. That's what an ani is, someone that's missing something. But it says tzedakah l'aniyim because it brings the gili of shemesh havaya, oinig, which comes, especially the third meal of Shabbos, primius atik. And then he connected to tzedakah because tzedakah is bechemish, a fifth, and chemish refers to the fifth level, chamishis lapari, which is higher than the four worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Siyah, higher than Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei. That's the level of Keser, what he calls Stima Dechal, Gili Ein Sof, Stima Dechal Stimin, Shalamai Lamai Lamchinas Atzilus, Atik Antu Chad. And that's what's nimshach through tzedakah. Tzedakah la'aniyim, shemesh, that through tzedakah, which is chemish, so tzedakah, okay, shemesh, v'shabbos tzedakah la'aniyim. So, and that's shemesh tzedakah, the shemesh b'shabbos tzedakah la'aniyim, gili b'chinas primius atik. And all this comes through the tzimoyin, the chelas ava of the 6 days of the week. From that comes Shabbos. Like we say, Misha Targ Be'erev Shabbos. You prepare before Shabbos for Shabbos. That prepares the Gili of Shabbos, which is Me'ain. And the Suda Shlishis, the third meal, is Me'ain La'asid, in the highest level, as was discussed earlier in volume 2. And that's where we stopped. So I'm going to continue reading from a little more than halfway down the page 1462, the line that starts with Commission is Bar Le'el Ba'erech. And you can find the pages, if you want to follow the text, at ayinbeis.com. V'zehu, and now he goes back to the pasuk that he brought on page 1460. So in 1460, remember the pasuk, the new paragraph on 1460, B'midbar asheri Isa. In the wilderness, asheri Isa, where I saw you. So it's dafke the midbar. So he goes there. V'zeu b'midbar asheri Isa. What does that mean in the wilderness that I saw you? So technically it means that the Jews are saying when we were traveling through the wilderness, the 40 years, we saw divine revelation through the Anani HaKavod, the clouds of glory, the Lechem in Hashemayim, the man, and the Be'er Shel Miriam, the water, miraculous water from the stone. But he's teaching here, it means even more. Why the emphasis on midbar? Because midbar underscores the thirst, the desert that doesn't have, that is parched. So he says, midbar v'tzemayim, because through the midbar, the wilderness, the desert, and the thirst that it creates, boyim lebchinas riyah, you come to the level of asheri Isa, riyah, vision, sight. Me'ein hagili delasit. Me'ein hagili delasit. Which is a pretty powerful statement, because in addition, what you usually learn is that the thirst will bring la'asid lave. Our thirst, by not being complacent, but not accepting the status quo of Golus and the Midbar, that thirst, ultimately, the reward for that will be, or the response to that will be, the Riyah that will come when Mashiach comes. But he's saying here that the Tzemayin actually brings a Me'ain, like we learned earlier, because when you contemplate on it, the Hasaga Gemura, the understanding of the Ayin and all the other aspects that come through the thirst, the distance, gives you a certain perception in godliness, though it's not obviously the Gili that will be Lasid Lave, but he calls it Me'ain, Hagili de Lasid, which also is very consistent with what he says in Tanya in chapter 37, which comes after chapter 36, where he talks about the Riyah, the vision that will be Lasid Lave, with the several verses he brings. He says, by Matan Teda, we had a taste of that, Me'enza, by Matan Teda. So in chapter 37, he begins and says, that's why the Gili Alakus of Mimesa Mashiach and Tchias HaMesim, meaning the future, is totally in what? Masenu B'avad Desenu. Because Schar Mitzvah Mitzvah. Because it's not, Mashiach is not just a detached and unrelated reward to our Avodah. Our Avodah is its very presence of our, when we do a mitzvah, it's a piece of Mashiach in this world. When we do a mitzvah, when we do Masenu B'avad Desenu, we're being Gili Elikus, because that's what Mashiach is. Like he says there, Gili Ein Sof Be'elam Hazeh Gashmi. So when you bring a Gili Ein Sof through your contemplation, through your mitzvahs, through your, like he's saying here, through the thirst which ultimately leads to an actual, tangible, and palpable yearning and thirst. That's not just a concept. It's your feeling. He says that itself is a piece of Geula. And the Geula, of course, is the accumulation of all the building blocks of all our mitzvahs and all our thirsts and all our yearnings. So I'm just explaining a little more why you could say it's me'ein de la'asid, because that's exactly, it's not just we do our Aveda, and step two is God says, now that you did that, I will now do my part and bring the Geula. We are active participants. So every mitzvah we do unleashes and releases a divine energy. And at the end of the day, Mashiach and Geula is the cumulative divine energy that fills the world. Like we said, Anachos Pesach and Haftarah, the world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. How does that get filled? When we learn divine knowledge now, Torah, especially Primus Torah, we are experiencing a taste of Mashiach and Geula. To explain why he says Me'ein HaGili, not just that it's leading to the Gili, but it's Me'ein HaGili de la'asid. Like we learned that Chassidus, one of the reasons Chassidus was given to the later generations, because it's like tasting from the foods of Shabbos on Erev Shabbos. It's the very food of Shabbos, but it's just an appetizer. It's just a taste. It's not the full meal. Like he said here, the third meal will be on Shabbos. In this context, Shabbos, Yom Shekuli Shabbos Menucha L'Chai Elamim, the Geula. But we still get a taste of it on Friday. In this context, the Elef HaShishi, the 6th millennium, that precedes the 7th, the Shabbos millennium of Geula. So it's Me'ein HaGili de la'asid. And it's interesting, the second explanation of why Primus Torah Chassidus was revealed now is because of the darkness. When the darkness gets deeper, we need more energy, we need more resources. And the Rebbe explains in the Sichets in Chelik, I believe, Chelik Tes Vov, or is it Chelik Chof? I think of volume 15, in the Yutes Kislev Siche, he explains that it's interdependent. You get when it's more right before the dawn is the darkest, the dawn of Geula. So in order to overcome this darkness, we get a taste of the Geula. So these two reasons are actually very consistent with what we're learning here. Because remember, we learned Midbar has on one end, L'umazeh, Midbar is Klippa because it doesn't have any divine revelation. But in Kedusha, Midbar is the deep thirst. And the Rotzo that's created, like you said, Midbar de Kedusha, when you contemplate on the fact that we're distant and everything compared to God, even the highest Giluyim, are like what he called Midbar V'Shemamen, like desolate and lifeless. So the very thirst, which means the very darkness, the Shcheirani, leads to this profound experience of Atzmus, which of course will be fully revealed when Mashiach comes, the Geula, La'asid Love. But even today, the Midbar itself has that element that leads us there, and therefore it's a me'ein, a taste of it. Whereas the neshamas above don't have this thirst. They don't have this profound thirst because they're not distant. They experience godliness. Not quite Atzmus, but they experience godliness in a revealed way. That's why they don't have this called desperate, if you wish, thirst and longing. Okay. So that's the first line. Then comes a parenthesis. Let's see here. Looks like a pretty long parenthesis. Yeah. So now there's going to come a parenthesis of around 15 lines, it looks like. Let me see, 6, 9. Actually, 10 lines. And then he's going to go back to Shcheirani, what the neshama below says to the neshama above, the neshamas above, which will then conclude and go back to the Eirariyah. But the parentheses, let's learn the parentheses, which clearly is some more emphasis and more explanation in this very concept of this Rotzo. Now, before I go to the parentheses, let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything about what I just elaborated. Okay. So Let's read the parentheses. Ubchinas Ariya, and this level of perception, and let me make something again clear. I've said it a number of times, but it's worthwhile repeating. And it's a question that also came up several times. When we think of vision, we think of our human vision, the things we see. So what do we see? We see things, with material things in this world, and sight has a tremendous power. It's more powerful than sound. When you see something, like they say, seeing is believing, but seeing, it creates a certain resonating truth. And we see how important Riyah is. Firstly, all the different psukim, the verses when they talk about hearing about God, seeing godliness. Ata haresa ladas haresa. You've revealed yourself by Matan Torah especially. And then the different expressions throughout Torah about seeing God. Vayera havaya. God revealed himself to Avram Avinu. He revealed himself to Moshe. The Nevi'im, they saw the vision. You constantly hear the word vision, especially when it comes to the future. The psukim I already mentioned, but he mentioned, and are mentioned in Tanya, he mentions 4 different psukim. V'niglik kvod Hashem v'ro kol basar yachdav. Again, v'ro, to see. Ayin ba'ayin yiro, eye to eye they will see, yiro. And other verses, v'hoye necha reisas merecha, that your eyes will see your teacher. And the teacher will not be concealed in a garment. And there's a 4th pasuk that he brings that right now. I don't remember the exact pasuk, but also all about, I think, with Nicholas Tzurim. Anyway, but point being is that when you start realizing, then you understand, like everything Chassidus explains, that every physical feature and every physical sense that we have is really meant to be an example. More than that, it evolved from the spiritual meaning of vision. Why do we have physical vision? Because we then have the ability to understand that there's more than just understanding godliness or hearing about godliness from a distance, but you can actually come to the point of perceiving it as if you see it. When I say as if you see it, based on these verses, it actually means we will see godliness just like we see Gashmis today. It's hard for us to imagine that because when we look at a table, we don't see the divine energy within it. And L'Asad Lavi, it says we will see it. But the most important point here is not just the seeing, whether your eye will see it, that we will experience it as with the reality of vision, not just with the reality of sound, of hearing about something. That's the most important point. It's not so relevant here what we will actually see. As a matter of fact, the Rebbe Rashab in Torah Shalom, in a Farbrengen, I think a Simchas Torah Farbrengen, was clearly a very big Yisraelis, was an Eis Rotzo. So the Rebbe Rashab said, bring me the plate. There was a plate on the table, and I will show you the Dvar Hashem in the plate. That's what he said. And then when they brought it to him, or before they brought it to him, he changed his mind. He said, now's not the time, because he's concerned that there'll be megashemit. Meaning he recognized that if he shows them something, they won't understand it as godliness. It'll be seen as some type of magic trick, or they might not see godliness. They'll see what the people will see, what they can relate to. In other words, you have to be ready to see godliness. It's not just, like I mentioned yesterday, an expert sees things not because he has magic, because of experience. He's gotten so trained that when you see just random dots, the expert will be able to see a pattern. And there are many, many examples for that. So the point, however, is most important point is that's not about whether the physical sight, we will physically see it, but remember, our eyes will be very different type of eyes because it will be so refined, like we learned that there won't be an outside light that we will need, the eye itself will see. So with that said, let's now move to the parentheses where he says, "B'chinas hariyah, he b'chinas Rotzo, oy b'chinas Shuv." Now, Rotzo and Shuv have been a pretty recurrent theme throughout Ayin Beis. As a matter of fact, when it talks about the 3 meals of Shabbos, it compares it to 3 levels of Rotzo. But especially Rotzo and Shuv. If you may recall, a number of pages back, Trying to find where it is. If I can find it quickly, good. If not, I'll look for it later. It's on the bottom of the right side of the page, where he said that something is a rotze, but it also has an element of shuv in it. And I think that is what he's trying to allude to here. Just a moment. Let me just see quickly. Okay, I don't see it quickly, so let me.
Is
I'll
it
just
1459?
let me see.
About 10 lines down. I just found the word Shuv. I'm not reading carefully. It
I'm
talks about
looking.
the midbar. V'zeh shemidbar eino matzmiach yesh lomer b'nefeshu b'chinas tokef haratza shehu rak b'chinas hala b'eino b'chinas shuv v'gilui.
That's not what I was referring to.
Makom makom is the nasa hashuv.
Yeah, like we're going to explain. We're learning that now. I was referring to something even earlier, but fine. That's also relevant.
How early?
I don't know. I would say something like 1440s. Maybe not. Okay, it's all right. It's not that urgent. I just thought if I find it quickly, it could be helpful here. I'll find it later.
Oh, I found it. I think.
What page?
Well, hold on. I think it's 1424 if that's possible.
Let me see.
Yeah. Well, it says Haratza Deto Mom's Beginners Kalayan Rak Shiyatza Bashalom Leos Achaz Beginners Hashuv. It's about 2/3 of the way down. Right before the parenthetical.
I'm looking right now.
I think that's the one you're thinking of.
Actually, it's not, but
No.
it's fine.
Sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. Now, I'm thinking about something very specific. You may not be able to find it with the search because it's not just Rotze and Shuv. He was wondering whether something is a Rotze, and he said it also can be a Shuv. Some place there was like two options. Okay, let's move on here. I'll look it up later to see if it's even relevant. So he says, "B'chinas ariyah, b'chinas Rotze, oy b'chinas Shuv." So earlier, the page you just referred to on page 1459, he said that why is midbar called, is not matzmiach, why the midbar does not grow things, because it's completely absorbed in a state of rotze. So it's not producing. When you're in a state of absorbing, you're in a state of bittel, not production. So it's not a shuv. But then he says, nevertheless, the rotze brings a shuv. Because like we're saying here, riyah, the thirst, which is a rotze, thirst is like going out of yourself as you're thirsting for something you're lacking. That in turn, he said, brings the level of riyah. So that's what he's coming back. It's a rotze because that's the thirst. Shuv would mean there's a response and you're getting something in return. So he's going to explain. Because when a person contemplates on the reality of God, and remember here the contemplation is coming as a result of the darkness and of the distance, and the yesh is recognizing that it's not, that it's very distant from godliness, and the ayin, and therefore it thirsts for it. So that riyah, from that comes ava b'tainugim. Ava b'tainugim is a love of pleasures. He talks about that. So riyah causes ava b'tainugim, and what does that mean? And ava b'tainugim is, on one hand, it's the level of rotze and yearning, because a love of pleasure, meaning you're really aspiring, and you're like you're yearning and longing Rotzo shekol hakeches v'kol ha'atzmus nimshachim v'nidbokim b'bchinas ha'atzmus. So he's in a state where he's completely consumed all the faculties and all his core essence are nimshach kol ha'atzmus, are being drawn and cleaving to b'bchinas ha'atzmus, into the level, into atzmus. When it says boy, sidbokun, boy, in him, in Hashem, you should have dvekus, you should bond yourself with. That's dvekus etzem be'etzem, the etzem of the person into the etzem of Hashem. So that covers the Rotze, the Riyah that's connected to Rotze. So essentially, when you're missing something, in this case, and you're contemplating what you're missing, what happens is it starts building up a deep thirst. It's like a very thirsty person, and that's a passion to be connected, like even on a very physical level. When a person realizes how thirsty they are, what happens? You start thirsting for water. And you become desperate for it to the point that you are yearning for it and longing and seeking it. But there's also Shuv. But the Riyah is also the level of Shuv. Why? Like I explained before with Tanya, and that's probably good that I explained it, because the Riyah is not just one where I am seeking and coming to a point of perceiving something I don't have, but it's actually also being sated, being fulfilled, because it's the Eid and Gili that comes in all the faculties of the person through Torah and Mitzvos. Because the Tzemayin also turns a person to be actively involved in Torah and Mitzvos, and we know their Atzmus Ein Sof, like he says in Tanya chapter 23, that Torah is Mitzvos is Evarim de Malka, Ramach Evarim de Malka, the 248 organs of the king. V'hainu de Mashat Sama Nafshi Lachzis b'Neim Hashem b'Bchinas Atzmus Ein Sof. Before I continue. So that's the second end of Shuv. And now he sums it up. And here's how it works. And this is V'hainu, and this means the Mashat Sama Nafshi, that which his soul thirsts. Lachzis b'Neim Hashem. Lachzis, again, the word lachzis is to see, to gaze at. The sweetness of godliness, of Hashem. B'chinas Atzmus Ein Sof. Meravid Simenei. He quenches that thirst. B'Teira Mitzvah Shem B'chinas Atzmus. So Bizman Hazeh, the only way to quench the thirst, he explains this in Tanya. Let me see, does he quote the Tanya here? He doesn't quote it, but in Tanya he says it clearly. I have to remember what chapter, that when you're very thirsty, so you do anything possible to quench the thirst, that leads a person to do Torah Mitzvahs. So the thirst itself clearly is a Rotze. But the quenching of the thirst, that is through Torah Mitzvahs, which is also Atzmus, because that is, Atzmus manifests within Torah Mitzvahs. V'tiyah simchas nafshei g'delo lelekim l'saneg al Hashem ba'ava b'tainugim. And the soul will celebrate. They'll have a great celebration to godliness, to take pleasure in God with a love of pleasures. B'chinas tainug de'er yashar. So here he's saying, so before he said ava b'tainugim, first he said it as Rotze, that would probably be a tainug of er chezer, because it's going from bottom up, the thirst. But the quenching of the thirst is also one that is filled with love, and that's tainug de'er yashar. Due to him feeling the closeness of Hashem through mitzvahs and Torah mitzvahs, and the dvekus in God, the living God. In place and a result of this, before he had the thirst, when will I see? When will I arrive and see? So the answer to that is he quenches that as much as possible. B'zman hazeh, through Torah mitzvahs, and he quenches this his nefesh with his gili, with which was given at Matan Torah, sheksiv. I'm sorry, shekavyachol nimcharti imo. So the pasuk says nimcharti, I was sold with it. God is saying, like we say, v'oisi atim leichim, that I have infused myself in Torah. Nimcharti is like, in a sense, you've bought me, or I've been sold together with the Torah. Nimcharti imo kavyachol. Because God is not nafshik savis yehavis, God infused himself, the atzmos, into Torah. So by Torah, by Matan Torah, where there was a gili, elikus, like we discussed, so in a sense, God is filling our need, our thirst. V'yizbiya nefesh sheikaka, and it sates the thirsting or the longing soul. Now this again is very brief, because how much he didn't say much about Matan Torah, at least not in this section, but the Rebbe Rashab is clearly relying, because Matan Torah played a big theme, especially in volume 1 and also in volume 2, because Matan Torah is like I said from Tanya, is a me'ain zehoye begili b'Matan Torah in Tanya chapter 36. That's a me'ain of la'asad love. So Torah mitzvahs that we have today is meant to help satisfy and quench the thirst caused by the distance and the darkness of the neshama down below. And all of it obviously will be realized in the fullest sense of the word la'asad love. When we'll have the full gilia of Enigla Kved Hashem and Ayin Beis and all the other psukim we spoke. So what did he add in the parentheses? That there's not just a Rotzo, but also a Shuv in this Riyah. Now the Shuv is not just la'asad love, but also now. Because it depends. If you're talking about the thirsting part, which is the longing, that would be more the Rotzo. When you're talking about quenching the thirst through Torah mitzvahs, that would be the Shuv. So therefore, the point that he made on page 1459, where he said, is clearly he's finishing that point here on page 1462.
Can you take a question?
Yeah.
So regarding the ability to see Elokus and Atzmus mamish with vision, it makes I understand the notion that people who are spiritually inclined and learn Torah and do mitzvahs would develop that expertise, to use your words, like an expert, a doctor can see something a layperson can't. But what about those who are ignorant, that let's say are thoroughly secular, not bad people, just don't have that spiritual inclination at all and don't learn Torah and don't do mitzvahs? At least I can't say they don't do mitzvahs. People do kind deeds, but I mean in the kavana of doing the will of Hashem. So how are they supposed to see this visual revelation of Elokus la'asi lavo if they haven't trained themselves, like the Rebbe's saying here?
Can anybody come up with an answer to that, to yourself as well?
Well, I'm expecting you to say it's all relative, and people will see it in different ways, and those that
That's
have
for sure. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
But I would broaden the question: how many frum Jews do you know that do Torah mitzvahs that see godliness?
Very few. I mean, in
Okay,
reality,
so you don't have to go to the secular world, just
yeah.
for the record. So let me answer it all in one broad response.
Stira, sorry, pardon the pun.
So keep this in mind. Remember, the neshamas that come down below is in the state of concealment and darkness. All of us, even tzaddikim, he said. Even tzaddikim, when they come down below, you can't compare to the neshama's gilui without a body and an animal soul. That's a given. So anything that happens in this world is only through avodah. Your work, encountering that darkness, which is a person's efforts, is going to be the force that will bring some revelation into your life. That's point number one. Point number two is, yes, of course, there are some people born and they're more spiritually wired. Whether it's from people or not, I've met many, many secular people and even non-Jews that I found more spiritually wired than many Jews that I know. That's like some people have a talent for music, some people have a talent for other things, and therefore they're more aligned, they're more attuned, I should say, to sensing spirituality. And you see it. You read books, you hear poems, music, other things where you see people are extremely sublime, and they just have a natural ability to recognize that the physical world is only a shell, and the spirituality within it is the ikr, is the primary. Now, when you combine these two factors, some people who have a natural inclination, they're more spiritual by nature, and avodah, which everybody can do, even those that are not spiritually inclined, then you get the answer to all your questions. So the avodah a person does is exactly, that's why I kept saying, al yedei hisbonenus. You don't come to love sickness, chelas ava. You don't come to thirst unless you feel thirsty. Like, let's be practical. How many people in this world are spiritually thirsty? Now, I would say everybody is, but how many are aware that they're spiritually thirsty? Some are aware, some are not aware. Some are aware they're thirsty, but they don't quench it with spirituality. They quench it with other things, sometimes even destructive things. Listen, a thirsty person can also drink toxic water, God forbid, because they're thirsty, and that's what happens. Many, many people, many addictions, many destructive behavior is people looking for relief for their thirst, but they don't know where to find it. So they unfortunately turn to either the easiest solutions or the quickest ones to somewhat numb and relieve their thirst. So the fact is that Torah teaches us, Chassidus teaches us, how do you quench the thirst in a healthy way? So first you have to be aware that you're thirsty. You know, a person who's very successful and very busy with making money and other elements that give them prosperity usually does not necessarily feel the thirst. And that's why it's very hard to reach a person like that. Unfortunately, what happens is in time of crisis or some anguish, some distress, some loss, some trauma, that opens up people because they realize my life is missing something. Unfortunately, that's usually the catalyst. Not the only catalyst. It could also happen in good times, but more often than not, it happens because what happens is it's a wake-up call. Like suddenly your comfort zone is shaken up, your security blankets are disrupted, and therefore something clicks in you that I start looking for something. So essentially, step one is sensing the thirst. Step two is doing things about it. So the healthy way is, like he says here, Torah and Mitzvos. Now, regarding different people, absolutely, everyone's on a different level. And as I said, some people are just naturally more inclined to spirituality. Obviously, they recognize quicker and easier that there's a fruit inside the shell, inside the klippah. Some of us need more hisbonenus for that. All of us can use hisbonenus because the more you contemplate, the more you become, in the words that you use, that I use, a master. How do you become a master on godliness? By learning about it, by acting on it. That's why we have Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasodim. We learn Torah. V'yadaita ayim, v'shavesa levavecha, da'asa lekei avicha, v'avdua b'lev shalom, Shema Yisrael, v'haftas Hashem elekecha. The more you work on it, not mechanically and not lip service, the more you become attuned to what godliness is. The ultimate riyah will be la'ased lave. That's very clear. But can you reach some levels of a perception that are more than just hearing about it from a distance? Absolutely. So my answer to sum up the answer to the big question is, everybody can achieve it. What level? It depends on how much work you've done and also what you're naturally inclined to. Now, I know some people through Avodah have reached deeper than those that are naturally inclined. Like we see it all the time. You guide to Matzasi, that a person who works hard can understand sometimes something that a smarter person does not fully understand because he didn't work at it. But that's another discussion. But point being is that everybody is included in the above, and it's just a matter of where they're at. So if you meet somebody and say they don't feel thirsty, they're not doing anything about it, obviously they're not going to have much riyah. But if they do feel it, whether they feel it because they're naturally that way or because something happened in their lives, or just in general, they sense something spiritual going on. So the answer is they can find many ways to quench that thirst, and ultimately the goal is to introduce them to God and introduce them, whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew, we all serve God, whether it's Taryag Mitzvos or Sheva Mitzvos B'nei Neach. So there are healthy methods of how to access and how to develop that power of vision, meaning spiritual vision here, of godliness. And that's how I would explain it.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? So now, let's go to, this is the conclusion of this whole big section. And now he goes back to what he started on page 1455. V'zehu, outside, we finished the parentheses. V'zehu she'emeres ha'neshama b'yidasa lamata. And now we understand, this is what the neshama says as it descends below. La neshama k'moishi l'mayla, shenikras, shenikrais b'nei Yerushalayim. So this is what the neshama below, that comes into a body and animal soul, says to the neshama above, to the neshamas above, that are called the daughters of Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim. What does it say? Shcheira ani v'nova. I am dark and beautiful. Ta'agam de shcheira. Even though I am dark. Shemisalim b'chinas eira neshama b'yiridasa lamata. Because the neshama was concealed as it came down below. As it descended below. Hine al yedei zeh. Not only did it maintain its neshama divine quality, dafka through its yirida, through that, he venova, it is beautiful. The dafka lamata, because dafka lamata below, where it's concealed and is a sense of distance, bo lebchinas avaraba va'ava betanugim. The neshama comes to a great love and a love of pleasures. Shahu inyan umidvorcha nava. So now you have the word nava. Midvarcha. The word midbarcha means also the word midbar, desert. Nava, the word like shcheira niva nava. Uba midbar asher isa.
Midbarcha.
Midbarcha nava. Uba midbar asher isa. And the second pasuk he brought, and the midbar where I've seen you, re'iyah. Dafka lamata. So the neshama is saying to the neshama below is saying to the neshamas above, I am dark, yes, concealed, but dafka through being lamata, that developed a tremendous thirst that brought me to ava rabba v'ava betanugim, to nava, to our beauty, and to our vision, to our perception of the divine, of a very profound level, on a profound level. So that is that. Now he's going to tie it back to what we go back to page 1455. One second, let me just see, 14, hold on, yeah. So page 1454 and 1455, remember the mashal of Eir Hariyah, a mashal that went back all the way to page 1352, where he began saying, V'nidali levayra inyan of Torah Eir and Ner Mitzvah and Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. If you go back to page 1352, if you have the page, it's worthwhile looking at it for a second. Just to show you how it's all, how the Rebbe Rashab ties everything together. So look at 13, he says, so this is back, this we're talking about over close to over 110 pages back. So that is now, he's now tying that all back here with his final few lines and says the following. V'zeu gamkin Masha Moshel de Erariu b'chinas Malchus Dasiya. Do you remember he talked about that Malchus? There are three different levels in Malchus. Malchus de Bria, compared to the light of the moon. Malchus of Yitzhira compared to the Even Tev, the light of the luminous stone. And Malchus of Asiya, which is the level of Asilus in Asiya, which is Er Hariyah. It was also Er Makabel initially because it receives from an outside light a Siyua. So he's taking us back to that mashal. Behind this galus b'chinas atzmus haneshama b'chinas ava rabba v'ava betanugim. That above the neshama is not necessarily the atzmus haneshama, is the giluyim of the neshama, but dafka lamata. where it's concealed, but it has the siyua, the support of Torah and their mitzvah, Torah mitzvahs, like he said here, and Einei Ha'eda, the leaders of the generation, and Einei Hashem, the malachim, before Shema, all that causes the neshama below. And of course, the most important part is its tremendous thirst, because that's not what comes from the other levels. The siyua is already giving it light, the neshama below, because it lives in the dark and it needs an outside light. But the thirst comes from the very darkness itself. So think of it this way. You're standing in a dark room. The eye has the power to see, but it can't see without some outside light. But because it's dark, you start calling out and saying it's dark here. And I don't want it to remain dark. So a thirst is built up. The thirst to see godliness, to see the ayin, which is concealed from the neshama shcheirani, because it's darkened. So what does the neshama do? It starts seeking and longing and thirsting. And how does it respond to that thirst? By doing Torah mitzvahs. Torah mitzvahs is ner mitzvah v'Torah They provide light. Ner mitzvah. Torah even more powerful light. Atzmi. Together with the leaders, Einei Ha'eda, including Moshe Rabbeinu, that are lead and guide us. They're called our Einei Ha'eda, our eyes that guide us. Together with the support system, the cosmic support system of the malachim. So now, a neshama in this dark room, its thirst was the catalyst that triggered everything, and the thirst is being quenched by all these different resources we have, to the point now that the neshama arrives to a level that's even higher than all the siyua and all the light that it receives, the atzmus neshama, to a level of ava rabba v'ava b'tainugim, v'gam b'chinas hariyah b'chinas ha'atzmus shalamayla b'chinas hariyah the neshama lamayla. And here he says explicitly, and reaches even a level of perception and visualization that's an atzmus that's higher than the riyah of the neshama lamayla, because the neshama above b'nei Yerushalayim is taki Yerushalayim, but it's not atzmus, because above they don't sense atzmus because the giluyim are there. Where's atzmus sensed? Only when there's the complete distance of the yesh, like we learned earlier. Ein arech lecha dafka be'elam hazeh. Zeu dafka b'nidasa b'asiyah. And this is achieved dafka when the neshama descends below. This is what the neshama is saying. Shcheirani, I'm darkened, but I am beautiful, more beautiful than you, even as you are in heaven. As we just discussed, dafka through its distance, through its darkness, creates a yisron er, like yisron er min hacheshach, and a level, a higher, a new dimension of light, of izgalus, a level of atzmus that's only revealed due to the profound darkness that the neshama experiences.
That
and
was wonderful.
With that he concludes. One sec. With that he concludes, literally 110 pages, but also a lot of other knots were tied here. The connection to Shcheira and Ivanova. But if you go back now, this has been the central theme that we've been learning literally for the last 110 pages, 112 pages if you want to be exact, but it's 110 pages, I would say. And if you look at the next page, which we'll learn tomorrow, he's taking us back to page 1350 or 1352 and 1350. But this will lead us to the conclusion of Ayin Beis, but the Rebbe Rashab never finishes it, and that's why we're learning it again, to see now in context how it all comes together. And you see how Er Hariyah plays such a tremendous role in this whole experience. So from Shema Yisrael, we get to Riyah. From Riyah today, we get to Riyah L'Aseh Laveh. Just to lay that out as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, but let me take any questions.
Sorry, go ahead, Rabbi. Go ahead, Rabbi Teichel. Sorry.
Thank you. He said before that his galus b'chinas riyah, b'chinas atzmo shelemaylo, b'chinas riyah d'neshama lemaylo. What is he talking about? The riyah d'neshama lemaylo. Even the way that it's mushrosh in the atzmos?
No, there's a whole arichus. B'nei Yerushalayim. Go back. The neshama lemaylo in Gan Eden is Nana Miziva Shchina, has Ava V'yira. Go back to page 1359. I'm sorry, 1355. where he talks about the neshamas l'mayla is b'nei Yerushalayim. They have a level of yira shalom, and yira is also from the word riyah. Yira, that's why Avram called it Yerushalayim. Avram Yira. Go back to page 13. He's talking about the neshamas l'mayla in Gan Eden, or even in Atzilus. The neshama lamata dafka reaches with the shadish of the neshama in Atzmos. Neshama in Atzilus is not an Atzmos; it's an Atzilus. It has high levels of Giluyim, but it's still not. It's still in Atzilus, and here we're reaching higher than Atzilus.
Thank you.
But if you go back, he spells it out very, very explicitly. Lishtaba begufa de malka is dafkin elam hazeh, as he says there on page 1455. Yeah. Any other questions?
It would seem that this thirst for godliness in the midbar, the Rotzo, an neshama that we're getting back to Yitzhak's question earlier. What about people that are? How do we get that different levels of Rotzo? That in today's world, like in time of Galus in the midbar, the people that are spiritually inclined that want to experience godliness in a spiritual manner, that would seem to be like contrary to the Shuv part. I mean, a neshama might be more naturally inclined to Ratzoi, spiritual experiences, and then there are people that are more inclined to Ratzoi, Shuv, coming back into this world. It seems like that is a difficult thing for a lot of neshamas to do, because you might have an inclination one way or the other. Either you're into this physical world of mitzvahs, or the more into the, like, say, Torah learning, and especially chassidus, cleaving to God. Putting those two together seems to be quite a difficult task during the darkness of the midbar. Meaning that you're going to go godliness, but then at the same time you want to produce vegetation in the midbar, which is coming back down. What would you say to that? How would you advise somebody that's more inclined to the physical world versus spirit?
Well, I'd say this. I mentioned before, there's some people more spiritually wired than others. Comes natural to them, much easier. Some people, it's much harder. Everybody in life needs Rotzo and Shuv, whether you're spiritually inclined or not. Because especially someone who's very like a free spirit is more naturally Rotzo. A person who's more grounded is more natural Shuv, but the Rotzo needs a Shuv and a Shuv needs a Rotzo. Because like this, let's say, take the heartbeat or the breath. A heart needs contraction and expansion, and so does a breath, exhale and inhale. So a healthy person needs the wave, the two poles, positive and negative, the tension and resolution for all growth. So that the fact that we are wired differently, or we are different levels, it's not really addressing that here. Here he's not addressing the differences between us, just saying that both are necessary and both are achieved in this world, where a person, the yearning, which is the Rotze, comes when you realize the distance you are from Elikus. The Shuv comes when you do something about it, which is like a person who grounds it in Torah Mitzvos or in helping others and so on. When you see people, for example, who expire through Kleis HaNefesh, or even some of the great geniuses, whether they were Jewish or not Jewish, that OD'd out of because they couldn't ground themselves. That was someone who didn't have a Shuv, a proper Shuv. Then there are people then there are people who are very satisfied with their material lives, what we call animal bliss, and are lacking a healthy dose of Rotze. So my response is everybody needs both, and yes, there are differences between people.
To follow up on Eliezer's question, I'm sorry, Robin, did you want to say something?
Maybe Eliezer wants to say something.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's my response. I'm not sure. I hope I answered your question, Eliezer.
I was just going to ask, not exactly ask, but this week's Torah portion is about Nadav. And
exactly, it's exactly about this theme. Nadav and Avihu had a Rotze without a Shuv.
So that was not healthy then, right? They shouldn't have done
I
that.
just said everybody
Yeah.
must have
Yeah.
Rotze and Shuv. Yeah, they
Yeah,
died.
yeah.
They
I mean-
actually died due to their Rotze.
Mhm.
There's a whole mimer from the Rebbe Rashab, a very powerful mimer called Achrei Mois Tofresh Mem Tes. He said in Achrei Mois Tofresh Mem Tes, the year is 1889. So we discusses at length. Yeah. Same thing with the 4 people who went into the paradise, into the orchard. So only Rabbi Akiva had a Rotze, Nichnus B'Shalom v'Yotze B'Shalom. The other 3 were all hurt. One died, one went mad, and one became an apostate because the Rotze was too powerful. They couldn't really ground it. This is a common thing wherever you see anyone goes off into a spiritual journey and they're not ready for it, or they're not prepared, and they're not mature enough, will have a Rotze without a Shuv, and it could be dangerous.
Thank you.
My question is more Chassidus applied, practical one. Like Rabbi Gold said, Eliezer, and you said there are those who are more spiritually inclined, those are more who are more practical, and even among the more observant Yidden or people generally. So, for example, when I give over a word to the Chassidus to even my wife or peers, they get it. They logically understand what I'm saying, but it just doesn't it doesn't resonate per se. I mean, it doesn't move them. It doesn't seem to tie them into the ruchnius of it. That it just say, it's interesting. That doesn't really do anything for me. And then they maybe go off and read some, I don't know, some nigla. And I've been trying, for a long time to try. I mean, sometimes people light up. But more often than not, it has to do with the nature of the person. And I'm just wondering how does one who is, let's say, more spiritually inclined try to help, if you will, others who are not out of arrogance or like I know better than you do, but like I want you to see what I think is really the ultimate emes, the beauty here, and really the pneumius of the matter. And they look at me like I'm from Mars. How do you help people see that?
Well, there's two possibilities. Since I've been doing this probably longer than you have, meaning over 40 years. So there's all types of experiences. It could either be I may not be the right shliach. Maybe I'm not able to reach that person. Maybe they need a different type of teacher, different style, different language that fits more. Like not every teacher is for everyone. That could be one possibility. Another possibility is everybody in their right time. You plant the seeds. I've given probably thousands of classes and lectures, spoken to hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions ultimately through YouTube and so on. I'm not going to say that one person could say their life was transformed, but then another person will say, nice and interesting, and they move on. Or maybe years later, something was planted. I see that too. Someone comes back and says, I read your book back then, but wasn't that significant? Now I read it now, and it's life-changing. 20 years later, 10 years later. So it's sometimes where people are at. You can't look at it like measure it in numbers. It's a qualitative thing. And timing, people's experiences in life. When a person is pretty comfortable, they're not necessarily going to be inspired that much because they feel they're already inspired, for good or for bad. So I can go on and give you analysis, but it's also case by case. So I wouldn't look at it as a failure on your part, or for that matter, anyone's part. You have to keep doing what you're doing. Maybe it needs more dvarim hayetzim and alev on your end. I always look at myself, obviously, and say maybe I haven't said it the right way, or maybe it needs more words from the heart, or maybe I'm not the perfect shliach for this person. I often people come to me, and I'll say to them, listen to certain videos of mine or others, and let's see what speaks to you. And some people, certain teachers speak to them more than others. Some people like more philosophical. Some like it more spiritual, more emotional. I mean, I could go on different options and so on. As an experienced teacher, I could say, and speaker, you speak to a group, let's say 50 people, 100 people, or 200, whatever. Not everyone's alike. You try, as a someone who's experienced, you try to use different elements in your talk. Some of it is more emotional. Sometimes it's a story. Sometimes it's a thought. Not always the same. And you combine many things. Sometimes it's a little humor. People need to be warmed up. You find in Tanya, he brings that Rabbi would begin his classes with a milsa de b'dichas, a joke, some humor, or other things that get someone's attention. But it's very hard to gauge people's lives because you don't know where they are and what they're up to. Also keep in mind, if it's someone close to you, you may be too close for comfort. Maybe you're not the right person to teach them. Maybe they're not looking for you to be teacher, and they look to you more to be support or to be a spouse or a parent. Not every parent can teach their children. Not every spouse can teach their spouse. It's because there are other elements to the relationship. I'm not drawing any conclusions because I think it's a combination of some or all the above. And from your point of view, you want to keep doing what you do, and and try your best, and do all you can do is try your best. And Hashem hopefully will help that seeds will be planted and will ultimately blossom somewhere.
Thank you. That's helpful. I find it interesting what you said, that those who are more thirsty are more likely to be more inclined to get to access the spiritual nature of the matter, and those who are more sated are okay. They're not looking for anything. So maybe that's part of it as well.
Yeah, there's no question that's part of it. That I can tell you right now, not even a doubt. I'm not saying in your particular case that's the reason, but in many instances it's very much.
Yes.
The people who have experienced the darkness are the ones who are desperate for the light. I mean, you see,
people who are yes, exactly right.
Drug addicts,
they're not comfortable.
Right.
The comfort zone is the biggest enemy to spiritual growth.
Yes, 100%. Thank you, Rabbi. Those were very wise, inspiring words and helpful.
Also practical. Remember, it's very practical. It's not always that,
Yeah. No, I said it was a Chassidus applied question.
Yeah, look, Shcheirani takes on many shapes, the darkness. It doesn't only take on the shape that godliness is concealed, it also takes on the shape that the person is living in a place where they think the darkness isn't so bad. Like the Baal Shem Tov says, Haster Aster, the concealment of the concealment. They don't even know it's concealed.
If I could just add to this discussion, I wrestle with it every day because of this program I run, trying to carve and bring Jews, primarily college students, to the Baal Tshuva yeshivas in Chabad for the last 8 years. Thank God we brought about 85 students so far for a year. But just one statistic will tell you, in discussion in relation to what Rabbi Jacobs said about, personal times where people are more open to spirituality or changing their life. As you just said, the comfort zone could be the biggest distraction and biggest problem with it.
Impediment.
Just impediment is the right word. And in the time of, just to give you an idea, in 1980s, earlier 80s, 83, when I came to Chabad, there were 17 shluchim full-time on college campuses in the United States. 17. And there was about 150 men learning in full-time in the Baal Tshuva yeshivas, the 3 Baal Tshuva yeshivas. 17 shluchim and 150 guys. In fact, Hadar Torah, Rabbi Goldberg from Hadar told me that one time there was 80 guys that came to Hadar Torah. They were sleeping in sleeping bags. There was no place for them. It was a spiritual time. It was still the time of the hippie generation, a spiritual awakening, a spiritual searching time. Today, there was 240 shluchim on top campus, from 17 to 240, and there's under 100 guys, less, 2/3 less, or a third less than one that time, with an 1,100% increase in shluchim. The timing is very important. As Rabbi Jacobson was saying, a person is goes through different periods in their life. Well, society also goes through different periods of life when they're more open to virtually searching. Today, young people in America, young Jewish people in America, are not searching for truth like they were in those days or spirituality. They're searching for a job at Google. And I'm not putting it down. It's just the reality of the situation. There's a lot of reasons for it, economic pressures, student loans. There's a lot of things going on. But I'm just saying that that's a very important point here. I think that the timing is important. As the Rebbe said, he is man galaskan. And the Rambam says, also Zman lo yisham. This Zman is important. And I think right now we're in a very non-spiritual time. Quite honestly, it might be the ascendancy of science, ascendancy that we think we know everything, and these robots and AI, and turning away from faith, super rational, super consciousness. Just wanted to add that into the discussion.
Well said, Rabbi Gold. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. Time is very important, but you should know we are, as Jew, above the time. And from Rabbi Simon teaching, I remember he covered the whole spectrum from where the Rotzen can be not released through the Shuv, as it would be in Adam and Abihu case, and from other pole is when we don't have enough rotzen, enough thirst. And from that point of view, I remember he said, you have to pray to have a wish, to have a wish. You should pray for have a wish. Yes, we need to do, as we used to say, start mitzvah, just mechanical, as a behavior psychology said, just do it and you will have a rotzen. At the same time, who give us rotzen? Only God. And from that point of view, everything starts from Him. And if you want to, from Him, a twinkle, just a twinkle, give you the first, so to say, start, then you have to just pray for Him to have the rotzen, initial rotzen. And then you will do whatever you have to do. This is what I learned from Rabbi Simon.
Okay, thank you all for the comments. Let me stop the recording here, bottom of page 1462. We finished.